Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Saving the World podcast with Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny. Today, we have a very special guest, Richard Kiernicki from Toronto, Canada, who has about 40 years in the financial business, with 40 years experience in the financial business, doing lots of great things with people's money, making people rich, and doing lots of fun things. But in that experience, he's learned a lot about the problems with the financial industry and some of the things that we need to correct going forward in the future. He's written a book, which we're very interested in and want to talk about today, called The Capitalist Worst Nightmare Come True, The Crucifixion of Capital. And Richard, thanks so much for joining us today. Love to give you a few minutes to kind of introduce yourself and share with our viewers what you're all about and what we can learn from you today.
Thank you very much, Luke, and pleasure to see you again. Martin, really nice to meet you. So I look forward to a good long-term relationship with you guys and talking about doing things to change the world, because one thing's for certain, it's not going to happen in a day. Having said that, I was very fortunate. My ex-partner, Michael Lee Chin, who became a multi-billionaire in Canada with a very simple concept, and his concept was very simply, don't buy milk, own the cow. And when you relate that to the financial services industry, it means don't buy the products that they're selling you. Take a look at the manufacturer of the product that they're selling, and then make your decisions as to which one would be better for your personal circumstance. So I believe that owning the cow was a really good way to go and to explain things to clients, because it was quite simple. And hence, that simplicity led to a really interesting growth, because I joined AIC, Michael's company, in 1988, and it was a $9 million company, so it wasn't anything insignificant whatsoever. And when I met with Mike and we had a chat, talking about differentiating myself as an advisor, and the memory I have of that was him asking me, how do I differentiate myself? And I honestly started to laugh, and he looked at me and said, Richard, this is a really serious question that I ask everybody. So why are you laughing? And I said, well, Mike, in all honesty, if I knew how to differentiate myself, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you. I'd be out there applying it. And he thought that was a great answer. So that was the beginning of a wonderful thing. And we laid out the financial principles that were addressed as the 5 laws of wealth creation, where that gave us a platform to create a relationship with a client based on not only their needs and desires, but also our needs and desires as financial advisor. Who do you want to have as a client? What kind of clients do you want to have? Do you want to just be considered a product vendor, someone who sells things? I'm not sure, Martin, if you have government saving plans for retirement, but in Canada, we have RRSPs, we have TFSAs, we have RRIFs, and a variety of other government-sponsored schemes. And since I'm not a big fan of the government, I try to look for the alternatives. So that's where I went with my career, and I was very grateful. And over the 15 years I spent at AIC in Berkshire, which was the distribution financial planning arm of AIC, it was amazing, because it took us about 7 years to grow from that small, insignificant $9.5 million in 1988, and approximately 10 years later, we hit our first billion in assets under admin. That wasn't shocking. The surprising part was the next year, where we went to almost 12 billion in assets, growth of 10 times in that time frame. And it really made me stop and wonder, okay, what was it? And in fact, that question kept me going, if you will, for a couple of years, because as an owner, when you're watching your business expand and the revenues increase dramatically, and financial management companies are an incredible source to create and compound wealth, because their shares are dependent on the assets. The assets are based upon the administration and the portfolio returns. So there's 3 upsides, if you will, to the potential of owning a money management company. However, inversely, there's also three negative sides. And when they do hit, as what happened when we hit 15 billion, I retired at actually 13.5 and watched, okay, as the company continued to grow until just after the 2008 financial crisis, where they went from 15 billion down to 4 billion, or just a little bit below $4 billion in an 18-month time frame. And the very simple reason for that was, why did that money leave? It was because the advisors that were coming on board at the time, in my opinion, they recognized, or in fact, they violated the fundamental principle of a prospectus, which is past performance does not equate to future results. So I was happy that I packed up and left the organization. I was managing a significant amount of money. And believe me, never thought that as a previous mechanic, I would be operating in the capacity that I was managing almost $60 million for 127 families. So it was a very lucrative time, but it was also a very good time for me to plan my exit. And being a workaholic, it was really important to get home and to spend more time with my children, especially at that particular point in time when they were getting ready to pursue their post-secondary educations and move into their careers. So that's a little bit about me in the sense of my background. And one of the things that I was doing on October the 18th, 2008, I was enjoying a beautiful espresso and looking at the morning newspaper. And Luke, you'll know the Globe and Mail in Toronto. So I was looking at the business section front page. And the article that was there that caught my eye was "Wanted, a new financial order." And I started to read the article, and it was with the Prime Minister Sarkozy and the Exchequer in Germany. I can't think of her name. But anyway, they were talking in France at a G20 summit meeting, and they both came to a conclusion that the financial system was on the precipice of actually completely falling apart. And it was Angela Merkel who was in conversation with President Sarkozy. So the article that I was reading really brought out a lot of questions as to how can the world financial organizations, how can they sell products that really endanger, okay, the clients' lives? And a lot of the money that went into real estate at the time and mortgages, okay, was sold as very safe investment portfolios to widows and orphans and those who were expecting an ability, or let's just say they were expecting something, an investment that they wouldn't be able to lose money on. And of course, that created the uncertainty on a global basis in 2008. And as I was sitting there and reading this article, all of a sudden a thought passed through my between my ears, and I recognized that it was me that was going to bring an alternative to capitalism. And the answer in that alternative, okay, was the concept of time. And this is where the fun started, because I'm sure you'll both agree, there are no courses anywhere, okay, on the concepts, the creations, miscreations, misunderstandings, and understandings of the entire system about time. In fact, as I started to dig into the principles of time, there were so many different things that were coming up. And I recognized that there were certain cycles that were more natural to our world. For example, we all know that we have 13 full moons in a calendar year, but yet we have 12 months in our current Gregorian calendar. But previous to that, they had something called a 13-month, 28-day calendar, which actually balanced out the systems. And there's many people that are, or that have been out there promoting a 13-month calendar. And even most recently in 1933, the United Nations, which I think in 33 was still called the, I can't think of what they were called now. But anyway,
League of Nations. League of Nations. It was the League of Nations.
Yeah, League of Nations. Thank you. Yeah. So in 1933, on January 1st, 1933, the League of Nations had planned, okay, that they were going to allow for the 13-month, 28-day calendar on January 1st, 1933. And it was stopped on the eve, okay, of New Year by the Vatican and said, no, we're not going to allow you to make this structural change in the system of time. And the reason largely for it, from what I've done in my research, was because it confuses people. The 12-month calendar is so disproportionate in the way that it outlines, for example, the first of the month is always a different day. Whereas in a 13-month calendar, that day comes up the same on a year-by-year basis. So it makes it a lot more, not only practical, it's less confusing, and makes accounting a lot more transparent because your calculations are done on the same day in the same month. So I was fascinated by all of that time conversation, and then that's how it all kind of came together in the sense that I started to believe that my time was not worth any more than your time, nor was your time worth anything more than my time. And hence, as I started to promote the book, the biggest questions that were being thrown at me continuously was, how is this system going to work? And it was funny because for academia, in the financial sense, just looked at my book and immediately dismissed it. However, I look at the work that they've done over the last 500 years, and quite frankly, I dismiss it because of the errors in capitalism's ways. And there's a number of different errors if you want to get into the conversation about that. With regards to the financial system that we are, I think, pretty, let's just say, clear on ourselves. But we could expand on that for your audience if you'd like to carry that further.
I'd really like to get into more of the meat and potatoes of the differences. I think we have talked a lot about the financial problems. We've talked about the banks and how they basically have infinite reign to make as much money as they want by borrowing a certain amount. We talked about reserve lending, where they lend out 99% times 100 times of what they bring in. So they're able to basically create money. It's a license to print money, essentially. And we know that the banks of the world kind of get a little corrupt. They kind of pay their CEOs way too much money, and they kind of just suck as much money away from the economy as possible to kind of enrich themselves by playing all these paper games, pushing money around, and essentially gambling with our money, like we saw in 2008 with the housing crisis, the derivative crisis, all these different trillions and trillions of dollars in imaginary paper money that gets pushed around and essentially siphoned off by the ultra elite, banks of New York and around the world. So we've covered that quite a bit in past posts, and I think most of our viewers are probably fairly aware of the problems with the financial industry. So I'd love to focus more on the solutions, particularly what you're bringing to the table as far as new ideas, how you'd like to run them, and how you.
If I may specifically ask for something, because it's actually very interesting that you focus on time specifically and like natural time cycles, because one of the many things that I also do is I am also interested in the sort of scientific academic study of astrology and the sort of historical ideas about concepts in natural time. So, but actually after your introduction, what I still don't understand, I would like to understand more, is like, how does actually the time factor in? Because you've described sort of one of the some natural time cycles, like the moon cycle, throughout the year, but I still don't understand like how it connects with capitalism and like what you could do with it and how it would be better than whatever it is that we're doing now in the economic sense.
And thank you. When we take a look at, your statement has a lot of different individual components of it, first and foremost, Martin. So I want to make sure that if I get a little bit off track, please bring me back into the conversation as far as towards answering your question, okay? But I'll go back for a moment to, let's just say, the belief systems that have arisen from the monetary system, because if we don't understand that capitalism is a cause, then we'll never understand, if you will, what the effects are. And many conversations that I'm involved in are, let's just say, weary, of that type of conversation, because they're not putting the they're not putting that foundation into place and then building out and around it. And that's where a lot of people really get confused, because for me, if we understand the current, let's just say, global environment with regards to the WEF, the WHO, and United Nations, okay, when we start taking a look at these organizations, and largely I'll point my finger at the UN, because they were established to create equality and let's just say decency, okay, in a world, to make our world flourish. And yet the whole system is based on lack and limitation, because going back to the lending of money, we have to understand that the largest component of why this doesn't get disturbed is because of the government. The government makes the tax rules. And who do they favor? The people who make the most money, because they pay proportionately the smallest amount of tax. So when we start understanding that the government is inclusive in this conversation, then we are looking at it from a little bit of a different point of view, because now you understand that it's not just the banks that have a mandate, it's the governments that have other aspects of that mandate, so that they are, let's just say, recognized. Because quite frankly, based on most of the politics that I'm aware of today, it's a little bit of a sideshow at a circus. We have, our leaders in Canada, which to me, and I've checked a lot of stuff into this, they should be ousted from politics based on criminal activity, based on disrespect for their country people. Trudeau is wanting to monitor, okay, what the entire country says and talks about, whether they deem it appropriate or not. But yet nobody is coming to the table to watch and listen to what this man wants to say about the same subject from the other side. So who's going to look after the prime minister talking about things, okay, and being disrespectful to his voters?
Yeah.
So why can't we have them be accountable the same way they're making us accountable?
Understood.
You and I have to. You and I go out, and there's cameras now in Toronto everywhere.
We could spend 10 hours easily talking
Yeah, that's a
about
whole
politics.
conversation.
That's a whole different
No,
can of worms.
it's just I think like we just
focus on the economic changes.
It's just like I was sort of waiting well, how this sort of point about politics, or like the United Nations, like how that connects with the sort of overarching economic problems that you feel can be solved.
Well, I think that a large part of that, and I hope you'll both entertain the chapter on time at the end of the book, because it gets really extremely clear on the answers. And sometimes when I get a little bit excited, like I am now to speak with you guys, what ends up happening, I miss little bits and pieces sometimes. So I think that at one level, the conversation's great, and I'm glad that you're bringing me back online as to where you want to have some questions answered. But I think when we take a look at the whole picture and we really truly understand, and I'll go back just very quickly to capitalism being the cause of what? Okay, the effects of, as an example, crime, corruption, greed, manipulation, poverty, and war. Okay, there's a book that's been written by allegedly the Bilderberg and Rothschild's families. The book is called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. And it clearly states in that book, okay, that debt is eliminated via war and genocide. Well, guess what? The whole world is working like that today. I'm 67 years old, okay? Since I can remember in the early 70s when Vietnam, okay, was at war with the other countries, and the US, of course, having a large part of that. I also came from a Polish immigrant background where my parents were prisoners of war that were moved from Poland to Kazakhstan to Tehran and subsequently to Africa. And they didn't get liberated until 5 years after the fact that the war ended. But yet a lot of people will, let's just say, close their eyes to these realities that these people were really not aware of was going on, because that information was held back from them. And that goes back to the financial system. the information that you need to make the proper decisions is, i.e., it's basically being bastardized, okay, by the people who want to control it all. And then we, okay, come into this world and we decide that, wow, we're very lucky in North America predominantly. I mean, I've traveled fairly extensively, but I seem to find that Canadians and Americans have an outstanding, lifestyle. And how did they get that lifestyle is because they've been fed all of the necessary ingredients of fear and options and education. And technically, they're really not doing anything for the unleashing of humanity's potential. So when we start looking at what are the reasons for this inability to create that flow of unlimited potential, the reasons are often financial. Oh, it's not in the budget, the company will say, or the government's way. It's not in the budget. But then they turn around and they steal $30 million or $100 million or whatever it is. And they expect that people aren't going to take notice because sooner or later it does, get noticed that there are these indiscretions that are going on. And yet in today's environment, there's nobody standing up to those people who are creating those indiscretions. So why is it that we're losing our own strength? Why is it that we're losing our word? And to me, the only answer to that is because number one, we really don't understand what's going on. But number two, what is going on in the context of, the discrepancies. So we all know that the 1% or the 2% of our population, that they have, in essence, more than 50% of all the assets. And I've looked at various numbers, so I'm being conservative. But the point is, a very small group of people own almost everything. And yet, at the same time, if, for example, everybody decided that on what we call a day out of time, which is to make up for the 364 days in the 13-month cycle, but when we have that day available to us, we could use that day to, for example, have everybody in the world walk into the bank and take out their money. And when all the cash is in the hands of the people, and a lot of the people didn't get paid back, then the people are going to go back and say, well, listen, you have to start selling your assets to pay us back. Now think about this for a minute. Do you think that we would stand in line to buy our assets back at the full price that the bank wants us to buy them back at when they're leveraged 9-1?
Actually, if I just may, this sounds actually fairly similar in principle to the kind of action that is actually suggested by, do you know Yanis Varoufakis? He was a Greek Minister of Finance during the whole episode where European Union tried to really put the tightening of the belts on Greece. And I think he's pretty much very left on the normal sort of political spectrum. But actually what he was saying is that he believes with some insight, since he was the Minister of Finance and knows the people and how the system works from the inside. So he said one of the things that maybe people should try to do is this sort of coordinated action. That you could do some sort of coordinated financial action that, even if it's in his example was some sort of a rolling refusal to pay for something that would be strategically timed across the world so that it would, for instance, completely disrupt some sort of financial company. That is the problematic part of this. So it's just now that you're describing it, it sounds like this category of type of action to take to maybe redress the wealth distribution. Am I correct, or?
I would say absolutely. It's cooperation, of the masses, that are going to stop it. I use the banks as the primary example because we're talking about time equity. But if you think about it, we can apply that in so many different areas. And I don't like to pick on any of the billionaires, but for example, we know the widespread business of Amazon, correct? We understand the widespread business. Can you imagine if 90% of their employees didn't show up for 90 days? What would happen to Amazon?
They go bankrupt.
Financially, it would go bankrupt. There would be nobody to answer the phones. There would be nobody to pack the parcels. there would be nobody to drive the truck or fix the truck or do any of the other things in the context of running that particular business. So if we actually suggested movements like that on a monthly basis where we rotated, okay, to the powers that be and say, listen, Europe is great right now. I mean, look at what's going on with regards to the farmers. I am so impressed with, what they're doing. But the message is being lost. The farmers are angry and they're spraying manure around. And I love that. I think it's phenomenal. But at the same point in time, I think what's really important is that the fruits and the vegetables that these farmers are growing and picking and doing all of the things that they do as farmers to keep food on the table for the world, stop feeding the rich.
So
Let
it's
them
about
eat their money.
So it's about targeting, like in this collective action, it needs to be precisely targeted at a specific group of people to put some sort of leverage on them.
Absolutely. And then here comes the next problem, because then they're going to have to shut down our communications. And we already know that Schwab says we're going to shut down the internet. So we're not going to allow people to communicate with their cell phones.
Also, just like a little, if I may, it's like a little joke. Every time somebody says Schwab, because in Czech language it means cockroach. It's kind of a funny that it's like a cartoon Captain Planet villains or something like that. It's just like as an aside, but it's like I think we generally I believe that we do agree on the what the problems are with capitalism, and I also think we maybe necessarily weren't specifically considering this type of action as like a kind of solution. We can definitely talk more about that, but I really think I need to try to bring you back to. I still really would like to understand what some sort of basic definition of what you mean by time equity, because I think it's really important to understand the time factor in this.
Okay, so would you allow me to read from my book a couple of things? Okay, that would hopefully answer the question a little bit more to your liking.
Sure.
So as an example. So time equity is the state of being equal, okay, in my opinion, okay? That means, again, what I'll just repeat quickly, my time is not worth more than your time, okay? So therefore, if we take that into consideration, all of a sudden, that makes people a lot more comfortable. So when everyone contributes equally, okay, in the context of the amount of time that they put into their labor, let's say, okay? And then we, in turn, have access to the things that other people do. So, for example, the farmers that bring the food, but they're not paying attention to the mechanics who fix the trucks. They're not they're not looking after the people who are going out and creating oil or energy alternatives to run those trucks so that they can go into their farms and pick their fruits and vegetables. So there's a lot of different things that we're constantly doing that if we all supported each other as the mass of humanity, okay, we end up becoming cooperative. And in the book, I talk about time, and I use it as an acronym. So T, okay, is for the truth. I is for inspired or inspiration. M is meaningful. E for experience. So therefore, the acronym for time is a truth-inspired, meaningful experience. Okay? Now I will take it and I'll go backwards. And I'll say that time backwards is spelled emit, E-M-I-T. E for equality, M for motivated, I for inclusive, T for togetherness. And therefore, the acronym for emit, time backwards, is an equality motivated inclusive togetherness. So when you put them both together, a truth inspired meaningful experience and equality motivated inclusive togetherness spells time and spells it backwards, okay, so that we have a foundation. So the reality is that the two thoughts, okay, well, if you will, I asked that question. The first is to bring into being a new vision of our world in time equity. And time equity has not yet been thought of or introduced when the previous petitions for the UN were made, as an example. So the UN and other people agreed to the change of it. But when we talk about who changed it, in a sense of not allowing the change to happen, imagine, what do you think the Vatican would have an interest in for the reason that they would not allow a 13-month, 28-day calendar? And the conclusion was that it interrupted their flow of tithe. Okay? Why don't the financial systems like a 28 or a 13-month, 28-day calendar? They don't like it because it becomes transparent. After 40 years in the financial services industry, I still have yet to find a person who can tell me how a mortgage is charged from the perspective of all of these different days of the month and the first of the month and the third. No one has ever been able to explain to me how the front end loading of mortgage interest is actually made accurate. And go and talk to your friendly neighborhood banker. Luke, I'm sure you've done that before. Okay, but I've done it. And of course, when you go in there and you start talking to the bank about, well, wait a minute, this is a front-loaded mortgage. Okay, and what the banks sell conventionally, Luke, they sell a 5-year term. That means that 5 times they get to calculate their interest payments up front on the residual balance of the mortgage every 5 years. So, Martin, I hope I'm bringing more light to the subject.
No. I think it's like slowly and gradually, but I think we're getting somewhere. There's also, interestingly, I have actually heard, because I've written a book about the sort of scientific study of astrology and sort of skeptical controversies related to that. But in doing research for that, there are a couple of things that I have encountered that I haven't incorporated in the book because they were sort of not fitting in there. And one of those was actually that there actually are theories. It's like you could call it, I guess, conspiracy theories, but these are very old sort of Gnostic theories against something like the Catholic Church. That they actually accusing them that they are messing with the people's perception of time to gain some sort of political benefit from that. And one of the ways is that there's specific agenda to confuse people about what natural time is and disconnect them from natural time cycles for some reason. I actually have separately encountered a whole relatively serious theory that they are actually doing these kinds of things on purpose. And obviously they have been the people setting up the calendars. So if there is some importance to natural time, then the people who are setting up the calendars that are going to be used in politics and economy or economics actually have a kind of important power in that sense that perhaps is not widely understood that it's a real thing.
Well, we have to understand, I think, at a fundamental level, and Martin, I'm going to say this to you because I think that you're perhaps more artsy maybe than Luke is. But the idea of, as an example, pardon me. I slipped my thought. It'll come back in a moment. But there's, now I know. From the standpoint of the natural flow of things is a vibration. And we all get, Tesla, for example, said that when we understand frequency, vibration, and energy, we will understand the keys to the universe. So I would like to take that one step further and say that, as an example, everything vibrates at a certain frequency. And therefore, the planet, Earth, okay, vibrates at a certain frequency, and the magnetic fields, okay, around it are creating an equivalency in the sense of how this planet is designed naturally, okay, to do the things that it does. Stay in the same track, stay in the same place. Nobody can debate the fact for the last 4.5 billion years, apparently, that the sun comes up at the same time and sets at the same time. So these vibrations, okay, the reason it's called, in my mind, a universe is because we're speaking about one song, one vibration. That vibration, from my perspective, is love. And everything that the elite are doing by putting up those satellites and all of the other things that they're doing, they're messing with our human natural vibration. And hence, through that messing up with vibration, they're talking about solutions that the world would be able to provide if these things were not manipulated. So, for example, if the world vibrated without all of these different electronic things that are going on in the atmosphere and it operated smoothly, we would be healthier people. And if we were healthier people, we probably wouldn't need to spend money on pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
What would that do to the pharmacy industry?
Yeah, actually, there's one thing maybe I would say, because of course this is sort of I would classify, like this is actually sort of an esoteric belief, because of course there's not a level of material science that could like exactly explain how this would work. So, but I do recognize there are many people who have this sort of sense that this is perhaps could have some sort of effect. But I think it actually can be brought into the realm of something that actually could be testable and provable right now. And I think time would be the important thing in that. The whole frequency and vibration thing. If you think about it, another word would be resonance. And this is the kind of thing connected with Tesla, that if you bring the thing to resonate in a certain way, that's actually the sort of constructive feedback in the resonance, then you can like bring down a bridge. Because like it's about the whole thing vibrating in exactly the right way. And with the time and people and doing things that are better or worse for sort of the people who are in power. Like if you keep messing with sort of synchronization of people's activities, then that could be one way how we could sort of prevent people to start doing things that would like literally engage in a form of resonant activity, meaning that it would be building up together as opposed to dissolving into a chaos of actions that don't contribute to each other. And doing something like a synchronized action is actually the thing that would be sort of in terms of vibration or frequency, would be the kind of resonance that actually maybe in the interest of someone to prevent the most people to be able to do, because then they would be able to accomplish things, because it's this sort of act of people acting in sync that is a thing that could completely realistically, logically functionally work. So I sort of do like these ideas, but I think much more science actually needs to be either social or material needs to be done in this area. But Luke definitely wants to say something. He's looking like that for a while.
Sorry, I still feel like I'm a little behind you guys as far as the metaphysical, concept of what we're trying to understand in the human experience and time. I've always been a logical-minded guy. I try my best to understand, but for the sake of our viewers and trying to help me understand from my point of view at least a little better, I'd like to kind of go through maybe a hypothetical timeline, just trying to understand what the world would look like under a time equity system, trying to envision it. I think that's one of the most important things, at least for me, is to be able to envision what that looks like in the future. What's my day-to-day kind of life like, and how is it different? How do I buy things at the store? Do I have a credit system? I have like a credit card with time on it saying I've worked 40 hours this year. I can buy so much with that, perhaps, as far as food and resources or pay my rent. I guess let's just hypothetically say the significant portion of the world reads your book, Richard, and agrees with it, that we need to change something significant. And we all go and pull our money out of the banks. The banks all collapse or panic or do some kind of civil war to get over it. We get over it perhaps, and we find, okay, we don't need the banks anymore. We're going to take charge of our own money and control it. And then we're going to shift to this new time equity system somehow. Can you kind of walk me through that a little bit, Richard, and how that looks kind of long-term, 10 years out, 20 years out, maybe 100 years out? In your mind, how do you kind of envision that future taking hold?
Look, I'd love to give you, let's just say, the best opinion, if you will, okay, that I can in the context of this entire conversation. Because a lot of people would pack up and leave anyway because they're stuck in what they call cognitive dissonance, which does not allow them to accept new ideas. But the premise is also that 3.5% of a population, okay, can affect the change necessary that the 3.5% of the people want to do. That's a proven number. So if you look at 8 billion people, I need 273 million people around the world to say, I read the book and I believe in it. So in other words, we need to rewrite the processes of education, because education today is based on education from over 100 years old. Okay? They're not getting people to move to their unlimited potential. They want to keep them dumbed down. They want to give them a universal basic income. And I'm speaking on your behalf on this, Luke. We talked about that. Yep. If I, for example, didn't have to go to work, I would go nuts. because I love to do things.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And there's a lot of people out there, even in today's world, and I'll say roughly 10% of the global population, they don't work. They take advantage of benefits that are, if you will, brought to them by government or other good-natured groups and organizations, looking after the homeless and getting people something to eat and all of these other things, because as a total system, we need those balances. But we're never going to know how many of those people, as an example, that are getting this money and they're doing nothing for it. At what level are these people operating from? And they're operating at the lowest possible levels because they're not doing anything. They're not making a contribution. So when we start to recognize that despite the fact that you're a floor cleaner, if you talk about a surgeon, I use that example in my book, okay? And Luke, you and I talked about this, a little bit. But my thoughts are very simply like this, because people will say, well, the surgeon is the most important person in the room because he spent an extra 5 or 10 years getting educated to be a surgeon, whereas allegedly the floor cleaner didn't have to go out and really learn very much to do his job. But the sad part is the majority of the people don't focus on the most important part, which is the patient. So if the patient had let's just say, a lousy doctor, okay, surgery might not go right. But on the other hand, if the floor cleaner or cleaners of the hospitals, if the floors weren't clean, okay, then we're also jeopardizing the patient's life by not having clean surgical tools.
Yeah, I think actually, if I may, an example, the COVID-19 situation definitely taught the world a little bit of a lesson on who is actually an essential worker and that it's not at all mostly skill-based, who is actually essential, even to health.
And do you know how many egoists, okay, Martin, okay, would jump down your throat at that comment because they think because they have a PhD, okay, that they know everything, but they know everything from the past. Okay. And the past has proven itself not to work to the advantage of the majority of the people. I mean, let's just stick with one negative thing. Let's stick with genocide, okay? I don't know what your personal thoughts are on this.
Well, bad is easy. It's a genocide bad. I think that it's solved.
Okay, so you see, there's certain things that we as humans can accept and things that we can't. And Luke, I spent some time, seriously, after our discussion, okay, of recent, I spent a lot of time really thinking about it in the context of, I would love to bring someone like you on board with me and other people that we can talk to, because if it's not going to be, there's an expression that says, if it's got to be, it's up to me. Okay? And it's up to us. If we don't like what's going on, then it's up to us to do something about it. People are afraid. They're afraid that if they don't show up for work, they're not going to be able to get fruit and vegetables and water and milk and hydro and all of these other things. And I think these are when we start looking at things at times, we have to start breaking them down into smaller little bites, because Luke, I was so overwhelmed when we were talking because we talked about so many different parameters. But if we put it all into employment or all into work, make it one category, then we can talk about that group having principles that they agree upon. So in other words, instead of having, like on the US dollar bill, they have a pyramid, okay, with the eye on the top, we're going to turn that upside down. And we're going to bring people from everywhere in the world who want to make a contribution. Because it's a democracy, I don't think anybody should be forced to do anything, even vote. But I think it's sad, okay, that today's environment, we need to have these people come and vote so that the right decisions can be made that are not based on what our government wants to shove down our throats.
Right. Well, if I may throw in a couple ideas. And again, we've talked a little bit about this, but I've given a lot of thought in the last 24 hours as well. And I'd love to just throw out a couple ideas. So going back into, say, 10,000 years ago, when humans started using seashells as currency or some kind of trading tools to be able to, trade my day's worth of labor for your day's worth of labor for flour or whatever. So trade kind of initiated. So you can kind of see capitalism slowly evolving over a 10,000 year period, much more so with banks in the last couple hundred years, obviously kind of butchering a lot of capitalism and the capitalistic principles that you've mentioned, and kind of corrupting it and taking advantage of it as much as they could to make that 1% richer and richer. Capitalism by default essentially makes the wealthiest people with capital wealthier and wealthier, and anyone with those capital gets poorer and poorer, to the point where every single society eventually crumbles under the weight of these totalitarian dictators in some way.
Or has to do like a jubilee, debt forgiveness thing. So there's like a different ways to restart the cycle.
You almost need some kind of method almost every year or every 10 years, or like you said, one day a year, where you rebalance the scales a little bit. So you maybe say take 90% of the wealth from the top and distribute it equally among everyone, just so that it rebalances itself a little bit on a regular schedule, so that everyone's kind of, like you said, everyone's time is equal. As long as you're doing something valuable with your time, and that's kind of how you figure that out is definitely tricky in my mind. But as long as you can find some method to keep each other honest and keep each other working, passionately towards something that we enjoy and making the world a better place through our work, whether it's janitorial or making food or making energy or making houses for people to live in or saving lives at the hospital. These are all great, equally valuable jobs as far as building society, on a time value. So I think you're definitely preaching to the converted as far as my time is as valuable as your time, as valuable as everybody's equally valuable in this world. And we have to find some system to kind of move past this current,
I guess so. That's the question. That's the question in there. Is like we basically do agree on a lot of the things that you're saying are problems, and like what actually would be meaningful and a good thing to have. So at this point, it's like how would you get us from here to there? Like what systemic changes would you propose that should be made through whatever mechanism, like coordinated action or elections or people voting with their wallets?
But I have a couple ideas on how we can kind of work together, Richard. And I'd love to, again, we probably can't touch on all of them today because it's just my mind's been reeling with ideas that I'd love to bounce off you. But I'd really like to go back to my initial question of how would you envision, like what's the optimal, we take our money out of the banks, I get that. We have the new 13-day week calendar, which I'm also a huge fan of. The 13-month calendar, I'm a huge fan of. I love it. I love the concept of every day being the same. I can't see anyone really disagreeing with it, and from a logical standpoint, it makes
it's
a lot of sense.
Bit like daylight savings time thing.
Yeah, so I'd love to see the world kind of change our mindset, of the whole capitalist mindset of greed is good, money is power, all these concepts, kind of the me to we mentality of we are good, we are building the world together, we are supporting each other by adding our labor and our intelligence together to make the world better for everybody. So 100% agreed on all of that. But how does that look in your mind? What's the optimal timeline in your mind for how we get from here to there?
Yeah, what do we do specifically?
And how can we help?
So here's what I would, and thank you for bringing it up again, because I gave it a lot of thought like you did. And I came up with a kind of an answer that I would hope would do two things. Number one, it would give you both the vision of how the people learn how to work together as a core group, okay? And today, what ends up happening as an example is we have a system, a capitalist system, that perhaps they don't want us really to know, but it's called planned obsolescence.
We've talked about that. Yeah, that's a huge. I'm very against that, obviously, for those saying. But no,
okay.
Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Let's understand planned obsolescence for a couple of minutes here, in the sense of what I would like to share with you, because, and I'll use a very simple example. Okay, let's say a guy works at a stove factory. They make stoves, electric stoves and ranges. Okay, and let's just, for argument's say that their accounting and all of the other different things that they do, they know that in North America, we have 400 million people, just as a place to calculate from, okay? And every year we know that 4 million stoves are going to break down. And that translates into how many stoves the guy on the assembly line needs to build. And he's being pushed to build those stoves, okay, on the timeline that says, I'm not proud of my work, I'm just slapping it together. Now, I remember days of way back when you got a sticker on things that you bought and it said, made in Canada with pride, or, manufactured in the US with pride, okay? And I started to look at that as the so-called option, in the sense of everybody knows what stoves are like. So let's say the guy on the assembly line, he comes to work, and under the current system for profitability, he's got to make 3 lousy stoves. Wham, 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 gone, 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 and he's worked his 8-hour day. Why don't they fight that? Because he's afraid of not having a place to live, not getting groceries, not looking after his children, whatever all the different reasons and things are. But if we created a system that was based on time, that stove manufacturer would realize, since we don't need profits anymore, what we are going to do is we're going to say to the guy who's building the stoves, make 1 stove every day and make it with pride, so it will last 20 years. And then tell that person, now imagine from a government perspective, and then tell that stove manufacturer that, let's say you worked 20 hours, okay, which is let's say the new agreed upon minimum wage is 20 hours per week. And based on that 20 hours, I can go and share with what I built my stove to you. You give me the pork chops and the bottle of wine and my new pair of socks and running shoes for my kids, because I'm doing all of these things like all of us are doing those things. So realistically, nothing changes, but what happens in the sense of the time? Right. The guy has now, let's say, 20 hours a week that he can devote to something else. And to answer your question, Luke, that extra 20 hours could be for personal education to move that person into a different role. Okay? Let's say that person finds out they want to do this or they want to do that. So these things start to open up in the context of, we've got to bring people in from somewhere. And in some cases, yes, they're going to do menial jobs. But for example, today, when I drive around the city of Toronto, it's a pigsty. It's a sewer. People throw their Tim Hortons coffee cups and this and that all over the place, as if it's a garbage disposal system for humanity. Look at what's happening in our planet with regards to oceans and plastic. I think that every company that manufactures something needs to be the recipient of whatever it manufactured back at the end of its life cycle, and properly, so when we're talking about, those are not jobs, as an example, Luke, that would be considered low life or menial jobs. These people would be doing very worthwhile work. And yes, artificial intelligence and robotics, maybe they'll sweep the streets. Okay, they're going to be delivering our packages and boxes. Why can't they have a broom attached to them that scrapes up wherever they go in the city and picks up all the coffee cups and different things?
Yeah. Roombas for the streets.
Roombas for the street. Yeah, that's definitely doable. Definitely doable. And they're already working on those now.
And so this is what I'm saying, guys. The most important thing is that we approach the concept, the cause, and start to recognize how we can alter the effect. And
let me jump back in, because I think you haven't really answered the initial question of how does it look like on the transition. Now, you've made a really good point on the problems, and I 100% agree with you that these problems are real and need to be dealt with. So let me just throw a couple ideas. So you mentioned you're going to be purchasing things with time. So what you're recommending is we dump the current monetary system entirely. We all put our money out of the banks and we transition towards credit cards that track our time. Essentially, how's it tracked?
Those things are all money based, and this is where you keep falling back to.
Yeah, I need to understand how I purchase my bread in the time equity system.
Yeah, so just I can make it simple. I can make it very simple. So are you or are you not saying that you're taking the time equals money equation literally? Are you turning time into a currency that then will be basically exchanged, or is it something else?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, of course. Like, yeah, because like the way you're describing it, I think it can be understood by somebody listening to it as you're explaining it now, and understanding it economically. Like, so what you're saying is that time will be the currency, and we will be just trading in time.
Thank you.
Or are you saying something else?
Not in the conventional wisdom, okay? Because people say time is money, okay? That's not a reality. But here's the other part, guys, okay? The other part of this, in the context of creating, if you will, the transparency that builds trust. And that is very simply already in place for us. We've got blockchain, gentlemen. Blockchain is supposed to, from my understanding of it, is supposed to monitor any and all financial transactions and documentation. So now blockchain, okay, well, if you will, maneuver everybody's time.
Right.
And they will record your time. So whatever agreements we come to, whether we work for 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week, 40 hours a week, we do it with discrimination so that we're not rushing to make profit. We're rushing to build something. We're building something because we're proud of the job regardless, okay, how potentially in this caste system that we've been raised to believe in, okay? I mean, with all due respect, I don't know the queen or the king, and personally speaking, I don't really care. But are they worth, in the context of what they do, in comparison to the guy who's making a stove on the assembly line so that the cooks at the Buckingham Palace can make the queen or the king a dinner? So you see, I think we have to start really be truly open-minded to all of these different things. And like blockchain, having an app, imagine, you know, I'm not a futurist in the sense, but you could. I wouldn't mind having a little chip in my thumb, okay, that I walk by my time clock at work and it records that I showed up, I built my stove, I cashed out, and I went home. I'm not suggesting that we have that. We have our cell phones that can do exactly the same job.
Sure. And
is there going to be integrity? If people are happy because they go to do something that they like to do, and then they can still eat and do the other things that they like to do, we're going to have a much happier society. And when we create that happiness, okay, some people might want to call it an illusion, but show me something that's not an illusion.
Yeah, but actually,
again, yeah. Sorry,
it's just I think, but we're just trying to drill down because really we don't have a lot of disagreement with you on like that. It would be probably great if it could be accomplished, this sort of end state that you're describing qualitatively. I think what we're just trying to drill down on are the nitty-gritty of the details of the economics of the implementation. Because now you said, like for instance, you said blockchain.
Yeah. No economics, Martin.
No question.
Okay. It's just like
how easy it is. Do you see how easy it is to fall into the money trap because we're so used to it?
Sure,
we've never experimented.
Okay. I'm saying like I'm using just the word because that's the word that relates to this kind of activities. I'm not necessarily referencing the past thinking on this. For instance, that's why I like that you, for example, mentioned blockchain. Okay, so now we're talking about there's a technology that can do a thing that plays a part in this process. That's a detail that I think is like important to the economics of this. So what I'm just interested in are things like, so for instance, because there are, for instance, like in the existing models of organization of companies, for instance, the one that's, I believe, the closest to what you're talking about is sort of equity between all of the roles. The only place I've heard about it is co-ops. So like, for example, what do you think of co-ops as like a part of the implementation of this?
And I'm going to say yes, of course, because my objective would be from that wide top into the funnel would be to get all the people who are excited about this. So you say, let's create a co-op. Now let's take it one step further. Let's dissect it. What do we need for that? And then eventually the whole world will vote on how that system will operate.
So just to throw out, there are several egalitarian co-ops out there that function without money. And they do this time-based system where they all put their work in. Usually it's farmers. Amish people are in many ways like that. Where they just all work together and they provide food and they all kind of share their resources as a, shared 100 person. And it works quite well on a small level, where everybody and everyone's kind of doing their share. The bigger and bigger you get, the more complicated it gets with people getting lazy or abusing the system a little bit, or the 1%ers that end up spoiling
then
it.
Maybe a question just like for look, like, couldn't that be just like then a whole bunch of small co-ops that are forming the economy? Like, I don't necessarily see then the argument for we need to make them huge. Maybe.
No, and then that's the goal. It's just about how they interconnect with each other, I guess. If they all have their own current time system, or if it's a global time system that kind of trades in time. In order to get what you need, you've got to purchase it with time equity in some form. Particularly with the bigger companies making semiconductors or making things for our computers, because I don't think we want to give up technology. I don't think Richard ever is wanting to lose his computers and his internet. We need these kinds of things to function in today's world. Or to enjoy life.
But I think I think I just would separate it. Those are two different problems, I think, because I have seen definitely an example of a high-tech co-op that was egalitarian, because it's not so much about what you're working on. That's really not the issue. But now that you've brought up, for example, the issue of supply chains, where we need to have multiple co-ops in a chain that are working together in some sort of efficient fashion, maybe that actually is a question that I think would be interesting to think about, how to either organize that, find an AI for organizing these sorts of things that's efficient always. I think it's never really, it's the kind of thing that hasn't really been tried in the world so far, I don't think, really, in practice, and maybe in future could be. But
work in a company like Microsoft or Google or Apple or Nvidia. These are the companies that are ruling the world today under the current system. And I don't think we want them necessarily to go away, because we want the products that they're giving us, and we're buying them. Even Amazon, to some extent, provides a good service in some ways, even though obviously it's a little corrupt and it's a little bad too, a little evil.
Well, actually, look, like in the light of what Richard is talking about, I maybe would push back a little bit against your characterization of this, because I think what we need are those people who can do those things to be doing them. I don't think we necessarily need to retain the companies that are currently organizing their work. It's actually, I would say,
100,000 people all trying to coordinate with each other in kind of a top-down hierarchy, which gets a little complicated under time equity system.
Okay, so then I guess we've landed on a question of coordination. So I guess if this was were to become a system, we do have co-ops which are somewhat like what you're talking about. So maybe a question is, okay, if we already have a thing that can do it, small cases individually, how do we
scale it up from a farm community that kind of manages its own off-the-grid resources, that's already proven to work very well under certain circumstances? How do we scale that up to large multinational groups? We don't have to call them corporations, but multinational groups that provide us semiconductors for our phones and our computers, and how do we make that work in a time equity system? And I'd love to get into the nitty-gritty. I'd love to get into these details, Richard, and understand them better, and help you, maybe build that system or build that vision for what that looks like, whether it's 5, 10, 50 years out, how we get from where we are today to that future Star Trek-like world where we're all kind of have what we need, and we're doing work we love, and we're all enjoying, the life that God has given.
Okay, so just to keep this going. So we've already extracted two specific things. We've extracted blockchain and we've extracted co-ops as potential parts of specific solution. Do you have any other specific kinds of instruments or technologies or forms of organization that you already have thought about that could also be part of your future?
Okay, so as a matter of fact, one of the things that I'm personally very interested in is taking a foundation of these principles, okay, and trying to model that for all of the other businesses, so to speak. So it would encompass everything from A to Z. And we all know that spectrum in the context of what people manufacture, pick and grow, there's scientists, there's artists, musicians, book writers, okay? The reality is that when we start unleashing our potential, because we have sophisticated systems that can help us understand who we are as human beings, who we want to be, and we start answering the question for people, why are you doing this? And they're like, well, I talk to people. They want a mindless job. They want to go in there, build something, make something, and go home and do what they want to do when they get home. They want to spend time with their families. They want to spend time maybe pursuing other interests, but they can see the collaboration in, we're not going to be working to live. Okay, we're not going to live to work. Okay, we're going to do the things that we are designed in that Star Trek type of system, whereby we look at the entire community and start to find the principles that bring those communities together. And as they come together, the foundations for how this new system will evolve. Luke, every time you ask me a question, I want to go home and write it down. Okay? I want to try to figure it out. But I'm only one guy. Okay? And this is why it's so important that for me as an example right now, I hope you guys can get this. I'm being censored and I'm being stopped with the dissemination of my book and even my thoughts. Yesterday, I wrote a blurb and I posted it on LinkedIn that I'm looking for PhDs in finance and psychology and sociology, and I want to solve problems. So I want to solve the economic problem by discussing with PhDs in finance, but I also want to relate it to how come people are so stuck in accepting a world, okay, that enslaves us? Because they don't even know that they're enslaved. They're excited about the shiny new car and all of these other things. And the sad part about that is they make the outside gratification the thing to be proud of, i.e., I own a 10,000 square foot house. Okay.
Well, I think today will be mostly Teslas and iPhones.
Teslas and iPhones.
Yeah. And again, I mean, how, as an example, how do we get, like what Luke was talking about, how do we get people who are building all these semiconductors?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have to give all of these different groups of people all these different incentives. And if they don't like it, we can go back to landlines and snail mail. Okay, with all due respect, guys, if you really want to do something, we have to sit down and we have to come together. And it would be wonderful if we could do a Zoom meeting for 273 million people that say, yes, we love this idea, and now we're going to take a stand, and this is how it looks in the context of the transition period. I don't know how long it would last.
Well, if I can make one quick recommendation, Richard, and then we'll kind of move towards the wrap up. But I think the one thing that I would like to see or need, and I think many people would, is some kind of vision, a day in the life of what this future looks like Star Trek. Star Trek is a great story because we can see it. It's real to us. It's still 300-400 years old. We need replicators and holodecks, which we're working on, but it might be a while
drives.
before we get there. So we need some kind of time equity, not fictional, nonfiction or sci-fi type book that takes us 20 years out or 30 years out to what is your vision of what the world look like? What's a day in the life of Richard or your kids or grandkids look like in a system that's accepted everything you have to say and is following you? You're the new prophet of the new world, perhaps, or whatever you want to call yourself, the leader of the new idea that will worship you as the godfather of time equity. Or whatever you want, whatever title you'd like. What does that world look like to you, and how? And if you can't write it, I might maybe write it for you, or maybe I can help you write it. I'd be very interested in what that kind of novel or vision would look like.
So the reason I'm going after, and in fact, I would really love if you would read the post that I made about looking for these people.
I've seen it.
What was the first line in it? Anyway.
Yeah.
What I'd like to suggest is this, because I think that based on your questions, Luke, you would be one of the perfect spokes, okay, to discuss in the context, Martin, yourself as well. The hub of time equity has right now 12 spokes, and the 12 spokes are representative, okay, of the errors, okay, that we're doing in the context of the stewardship of our planet. And that's got to be taken into consideration, because what we're doing at present, and one of my spokes is a gentleman by the name of James Boyd Fuller. And James has written 2 books, his most recent one called Deep Calls to the Deep. And James is a very interesting guy. He spends half of his life on a ship in the Gulf of Mexico looking for hypoxic zones, okay, and measuring where they are, where they come into play. How much time do we have before all of this oxygen in our oceans will dissipate and we'll have dead oceans. We will not live for 25 years if we don't start cleaning up the mess. So James is a soil remediation expert. And when we talked about energy as an example, one of the things that we know that 64% of the world uses coal to boil water, to create steam, spin a turbine that spins a generator that spits out electricity. So the question becomes, what do you do with all that coal ash? Well, James discovered that by adding microbials, the proper microbials, that becomes the foundation for the best non-chemical fertilizer in the entire world. So we can use the garbage of the industry, okay, while we're making plans for other stuff, okay? And in James's book, okay, he explains kind of that process of how instead of the fertilizers that are being manufactured from the oil and gas companies, those are the causes of the poison as it leaches through the entire Mississippi River system in the United States and flows into the Gulf of Mexico and other areas. So this guy, okay, who I met on LinkedIn, he wrote an entire chapter about me in his latest book. Now, I was blown away. I was like, are you kidding? You wrote an entire chapter about me in your book? And he goes, yeah, and I need you to edit it, you know? I'm like, wow, I can kind of like write in what I want, but I didn't want to change the essence of what James wrote. But what James wrote was a message to other people who are entrepreneurial in their thinking. And one of the people on our board, on our spoke team, is a gentleman who's created an energy solution. And twice he went to the United Nations to present it. They loved it. They called him back for a third time. And on that third visit, as I understood it, Siemens Electric and General Electric offered him $12 million to take the patent.
To kill it.
And of course, we know what would happen once they paid for the patent. It would get buried because those companies want to remain the profitable entity that they are. So when we start, thank you, absolutely. So when we start looking at these things from this perspective of some people don't care about the money. I've been in the investment business all my life. I could have stayed in it for a lot longer, but it just, pardon the expression, it just didn't turn my crank anymore. I did my best for my clients. I did my best for me. I went way beyond where I thought I would ever be. But at the same point in time, what's happiness? And if we can help people feel good because they're healthy, because the planet is being looked after, which I think is our first priority, Luke, is to make our planet safe for future generations. You have 6 children. I have 3. Martin, how many do you have? Do you have children yet?
Oh, no, not yet. No.
Okay. So between just the 2 of us, okay, there's 9 children. That effectively means we're all having 3 children. All of my cousins in England, Australia, and everywhere else, my cousins all have 3 children. I don't know why, maybe just some lucky thing with the number 3. But the point is...
Yeah, there's also a lot of children in my family. Yeah.
Okay, and this is where we've got to start looking at, okay, let's start a place, and I think the first place, and where I see you fitting in, Luke, and Martin, you the same. I see you guys being pioneers in putting together the roadmap, okay, to do all this. What's most important? We know energy is important. We know stewardship of our planet is important. We know all of these other things that are important, and yet we're not doing anything really about them. Yes, there are some groups, and the intent is to continue to meet with these groups and talk to these people. Look at Mr. Maley, who got recently elected as the president of Argentina, I think it was. And look at what he's doing from the standpoint of cleaning up government. Wow, what a great example. And then you take a look at other examples that aren't anywhere near as decent. And yet, at the same time, the legal system is in such a state whereby, and I checked this out extensively, you can't get rid of Trudeau. I mean, failing a budget meeting failing two things, okay, are the only way that he can be escorted from the stage of being the Prime Minister in Canada. I call that I call that protectionism and racketeering.
I would just want to say before we sort of again shift to some other topic, I would just like want to summarize, like, so basically what you said, I think actually is a specific action to take as part of a plan to transition actually. And that is something that we've basically created this podcast for. It's called Saving the World Together, with the emphasis on together. And we also believe that an important step that's not happening is the people who would want to work on solving actually some problems or making some these constructive changes for them to start to coordinate. And I think so, like before you said the example of like a precise coordination of like larger groups of people aimed against some financial institutions might be important. I think in the same way, actually, it would be important to enable the people who actually do want to make some constructive changes to start to coordinate. So it's like to continue in the sort of the Captain Planet metaphor, like for the Planeteers to, unite, how they like unite the ring so that they together summon the Captain Planet thing. I haven't actually watched that, so I've just seen some memes.
Growing up.
But the thing is, like, I actually do believe that it's something that also nobody is generally talking about because that's definitely the last thing I believe in the interest of like anybody who's running the current situation is to in any way even like mention that it's a possibility for people to like try to specifically organize so that they can brainstorm ways how to specifically transition to something better.
And thank you very much for saying that, Martin, because at the end of the day, I think that's what we've come to conclude here, that if there's going to be a way, as I said before from the quote, if it's got to be, it's up to me. And if we have a roadmap, or at least an idea of a roadmap of how we can do this, that everybody's creativity when we're sitting down and actually spending the time to think these things through with other people, what are the most beneficial ways for society to gain, okay, all the things that we're, struggling with. Look at, I mean, think about this. In Canada, they're having assisted suicide. They're confusing children as to their direction in life on a preferential basis, as to what sex they are. We're confusing people, and we don't even have the answers in the first place, because it all boils down to one thing. And that one thing is brotherly love and a genuine caring for each and every one of us to work in cooperation to enjoy. I mean, think about it. Even Bill Gates is an example. He had a vision and he created it and he worked it to the best of his ability and he changed the world. Good for you. I'm happy. I'm happy that he's done whatever it is that he wants to do. But now, what do you do on your next stages?
Right.
Okay.
He's a great example, actually, because he's taken his $100 billion and he's got the Gates Foundation, which he's given 99% of his money away to essentially help cure malaria, help solve many of the epidemic crises, help solve the energy crisis. He's working on many new energy forms. So hopefully he'll get one of these free energy ones eventually that Siemens is trying to buy, and he'll share it with the world. I don't know if it will or not. He might have ulterior motives. Everyone always thinks there's a little bit of evil behind him, but I happen to really like what he's done. And I think he's a good example. Elon Musk as well is another great example that I think has done great things for the world to move us towards electric transportation and solar energy. And yeah, there's always kind of
and reusable rocketry.
And rocketry. Yeah, there's always gray areas to every rich person's kind of background, I think. I don't know if you get rich without, crossing a few people the wrong way, one way or another, and kind of getting a little corrupt because the system makes you that way by necessity almost. Same with politicians.
How about we consider this for a moment, okay? Let's take the U.S. defense budget, which is $1 trillion, right? Let's take that money and put it into the rocketry program, the space exploration program, and let's blow the warmongers off the planet.
Okay. Well, let's transition. So I think there's lots more to talk about, Richard. Thank you so much.
Just to transition the billionaires to like outer space, literally. That's part of the transition plan.
Take
their money to Mars. Take their money to Mars, and we'll have a time equity system.
And you know what, guys? Thank you so much for your time. And I really, truly hope that this is the beginning, okay, of a lot of conversation going forward. And literally, okay, I know that you'll be a part of the change. So let's work together in a spirit of unitedness and solidarity, okay, that says, yes, these are the problems that we start with to identify which ones are the most important, and let's get busy and fix them. Imagine that, Luke. One last thing, okay? It doesn't cost anything to fix all the problems if we allow ourselves, okay, to believe in that illusion or that vision. We can do anything that we want to be. If you had told somebody 1,000 years ago that there would be a rocket ship going to the moon, they would have thought you were nuts. My step of getting rid of money, okay, and the monetary system to bring out the true integrity of people, it's not a long shot. And I would bet if I could live long enough, another 100 years, I would look back and I would see the transition time and what happened into a moneyless society, just like Star Trek.
Yeah.
And hopefully, all of us, okay, will achieve our dreams.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I arguably think that this next 10 years is probably the most important time in the history of humanity, in the back or in the future, because this is the time when we make the transition to either a sustainable world with a new post-capitalist system of some kind, or we fall off the cliff and end up, back in cavemen or extinct entirely. And this next 10 years to 20-year period will 99.9% decide that one way or the other, which makes us kind of the key generation in the history of humanity.
And don't forget, okay, if we don't do it, okay, Klaus Schwab is aggressively, okay, going to shove their system, their agenda down our throats.
It's utopia or oblivion. Utopia or oblivion is the thing, but we've changed the word to protopia because it's always progressing towards a better world, a better state.
Have you seen the 30 points of the WEF's and the UN's mandate? Number four. Okay, get this. Number 4 is to create a military, a one world military. Isn't that stupidity?
Yeah.
Think about it. You're going to have a one world government war machine. Who are they going to go fight?
It's a peacekeeping force. It fights the tyrants and the drug lords.
You're not going to have any because the monetary system's.
Yeah, well, in the better case, aliens.
Aliens, maybe. Maybe we need to fight aliens. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
We'd love to have you again sometime, Richard, once we've had time to kind of stew on these ideas. Thanks to our viewers for staying with us. If you stayed with us till the end, share with us your comments. Let us know what you think about Richard's book. Check it out online. We'll put all the links in the descriptions below. Please check it out. Let us know what you think, and if you want to help us build the world together, there it is.
And just as a proof in the pudding from the standpoint of where I put my money, where my mouth is, please acknowledge and invite all of your listeners, your friends, and your contacts to get a complimentary copy of my book, and a digital complimentary copy of my book, okay, at my website. They can look up my name and find the book for free. So I put my money where my mouth is, guys. This book was 12 years in the preparation, and that was my time. And I was very grateful to be able to vibrate and to receive the energy that came. And I know that you guys are on the same path, that we're looking for solutions to create the sustainable and wonderful planet that we call home. Thanks for your time. Look forward to seeing you more.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And thanks, Martin. Any final words from you, Martin, from your side?
Well, I think I've made already enough pop culture references in this episode.
All right. All being said, thanks everyone for joining us, and let's save the world together. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.